I'm Terry Shepard. Being a confident podcast guest is a skill that can be learned. And that's why I wrote How to Become a Dynamic Podcast Guest and Sell Stuff. It's a sweet and short primer that teaches you about the gear, the appearance, and the messaging that can grab and hold today's micro attention spans and motivate your listeners to take action. How to Become a Dynamic Podcast Guest and Sell Stuff. The digital version is just $1.99 at Amazon. Grab your copy today and sell more books tomorrow.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
For many immigrants, the journey to America begins with leaving something behind. For author and architect Mario Cartaya, that departure came at the age of 8 when political upheaval in Cuba forced his family to seek a new life in the United States. What followed was a remarkable American story, one that led Mario to fulfill his childhood dream of becoming an architect and to build an acclaimed architectural firm in Fort Lauderdale. His work and life achievements were even entered into the United States Congressional Record, and in 2022, an American flag was flown over the U.S. Capitol in recognition of his legacy. But success does not erase memory. In his memoir, Journey Back into the Vault, In Search of My Faded Cuban Childhood Footprints, Mario turns inward and backward, returning to Cuba for the first time in 56 years. The book chronicles a deeply personal search for the fragments of a childhood interrupted by history. Mario Cartaya, it's great to have you here. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here as well.
What do you remember about your childhood in Cuba?
Well, what happened to me was one of those curious psychological cases where my departure from Cuba was kind of traumatic in the fact that my father's life had been threatened, and he was told that for his benefit as well as ours, we should leave the country as quickly as possible. And so we ended up coming here in September of 1960, not the 1960s, 1960. So once I came here, what I know now is that the trauma was dealt with my psychological state as my subconscious taking over and encapsulating it so that I would not keep going backwards to those trying days and focus on my future. Well, in time, it became 56 years. So for those 56 years, I had really no memories. The only thing I knew of Cuba were those stories that my parents would tell or those pictures that we were able to bring with us. But other than that, I had no context with any of those things. So 56 years later, I helped President Obama in his rapprochement of Cuba. And when the group left, I was invited to go down with the group, but I didn't. I did not feel comfortable making my first time back a political journey. I had a lot of other things I felt that I had to somehow resolve, not knowing what it was. When I did hear Obama speak from the Great Theater and begin with his reciting of Jose Marti's famous poem, I'm going to cultivate a white rose for a friend. I am also going to cultivate a white rose for my enemy. And I heard that, and all that I could think of is, why is it that I cannot reconcile my past? And I began to cry. And I turned to my son and I said, buddy, I'm going to have to go to Cuba. I have to go. I can't live not knowing who I am. I told him, I know who I've become, an architect of note, an American architect of note, but I don't know the entirety of my life. I need to go back and reconcile it. And I did. And the book talks about what I found. I didn't know everything I left behind. I went looking for it.
And Cuba has been kind of frozen in time. I remember In my visit there, it felt to me like I was back in the late 1950s and 60s. Was that your first impression when you landed?
Oh yeah, Cuba is like a clock that stopped in 1959. Even the places that I visited, hoping that the stimulus would bring back the memories. Right, the homes that I lived in, the school that I went to, the park I played in, all that. Nothing had changed. Absolutely nothing had changed. It was wonderful to go back to that because then all the stimulus that I needed to not just return the memories, but really at the end, it was like reliving my childhood. And that's another psychological wonder that hopefully we can talk about later.
Our special guest is Mario Cartaya. His book is Journey Back into the Vault in Search of My Faded Cuban Childhood Footprints. How did growing up between two cultures shape your sense of identity?
Well, when I came from Cuba, of course, I came with all of my identity and my language and everything else. I did go to a school when I was in Cuba called the Edison Institute, where they taught you a little English. So when I came, I already spoke a little bit of English, so I could get by. And the U.S. was the land of Roy Rogers. It was the land of Mighty Mouse. It was the land of Flash Gordon. It was the land of Rin Tin Tin, not Lassie, Rin Tin Tin. It was the land of Major League Baseball. So Cowboys, baseball, it was perfect. I just continued all those growing up, everyday enjoyment that I had here in the U.S. In the book, I say living in America was easy because it really wasn't that different, except for the language. Becoming an American took a little more time. I had to learn all the nuances, right? That is part of the mores, part of the everyday life, the culture, the slang. It's a funny story. One of my best buddies, when I first got here in the fourth grade, right? There's this other kid like me, was very athletic. So he was teaching me football already, but in the baseball field, we both did very well. I had to learn football. So one day I was sick. My nose was running and I had a fever and I'm in school. And he comes to me and he goes, Mario, your nose is running. And I thought that he was making fun of me being Cuban. And I said, no, Mike, nose, no run, foot run, no nose. And he goes, no, Mario, your feet smell. So I punched him. So they took us into the principal. Now, thank God things were different back in 1960. So they take us to the principal and the principal says, you two guys are best friends. I see you all the time out there playing, laughing, having fun. And he goes, Mario, why did you punch him? I told him he was making fun of me. No, he wasn't making fun of you. This is just slang. So I realized very quickly I have to learn the slang. Little things like that. So it really wasn't a horrible thing, but it's something that I had to go through. And soon enough, I was already singing the national anthem and everything else. So it eventually I was able to blend in and become an architect.
And what made you decide to do that?
Well, since I was in Cuba, I grew up where my whole family lived together. It was an old Spanish, not Cuban, but Spanish way. My great-grandparents both come from northern Spain. And so we used to continue that in Cuba, right? So I lived in a big household where my grandparents lived, my uncles lived, and then, of course, my father, my mother, my brother, and I lived. So I was raised by all of them at one time or another. My Mateo side of the family, my maternal side, were all very artistic. They all played an instrument, or they wrote poetry, or they sang, or they were very, very artistic in everything they did. My mother was a classical pianist, right? My father's side, they were all accountants. So you can imagine if you could pick two alternate parts of your brain to work out, it was that. So I had that rare combination of the curiosity that an artist would have, but also have the kind of integrity that you need in order to put dreams to work, in order to understand addition, understand subtraction, understand what you can and cannot do, or try to make it happen in a more scientific way. So I get that combination. My grandfather, I guess, noticed it. And he would always have me, the last couple of years that I was in Cuba, he would have me play with three-dimensional toys. And I think that's where the love of being able to construct something from nothing started, and then express it in an architectural way, but then design it in a way that it doesn't fail, in a way that it doesn't leak, like my father would have told me.
We're both the same age, Mario. So what were some of those toys you played with as a youth?
Oh, I had an erector set. Remember the erector set? It was all metallic, and I had a crane. In the book, I talk about when I left Cuba, and it was a kind of very sad trip. You had all these people in the airplane crying and sad and worried and nervous, all that. So in my mind, I pictured my little red toy crane lifting me from Havana to Cuba. So even then, what I played with kind of helped me psychologically to, kind of crossing the straits of Florida without the fear, I had the comfort of my little toy crane. We also had that engine that you used to put whatever it was, and it gave you smoke. Remember those motor type engines? And we would play with that. We would fly kites now and then. And also baseball. Baseball has been my go-to since I was a little kid.
What was your position when you played?
I played second and I played short.
Of course, the two most important bases.
So I was your typical middle infielders. Good hands, light bat.
We're talking with Mario Cartaya. The book is Journey Back into the Vault in Search of My Faded Cuban Childhood Footprints. His website is mariocartaya.com, Cartaya, mariocartaya.com. What emotions did you feel when you finally stepped back on Cuban soil for the first time in decades?
It was kind of a weird series of emotions. It wasn't one. There were like hundreds of emotions that came and went. When we first landed, it was fear. Okay, now I'm back. What would my father think of me coming back to the land that he had to exit so suddenly? But then again, there I am. As I walked into the terminal, I realized this is the same terminal from where we left. How beautiful that I've come full circle. And then as I'm beginning to walk out of the airport, I thought to myself, there's no reason to worry. What this airport means today is that it is a portal for a returning son that wants to reconnect, with his youth. So I stepped outside all, excited that as I walked outside, those would be my first steps back into reconnecting with myself.
When you began reopening those memories, were there moments that surprised you or changed how you understood your past, looking at things from an adult perspective?
All of them. Every step, every memory that came back kind of led to that moment. There's a moment in Cuba, me sitting behind a balcony, where I learned that my time in Cuba has come to an end, and we have to leave because of the threats made upon my father. Nothing that he did, but my father was an accountant, and all of his clients were American. Frigidaire, Sylvania, General Electric, these large American firms. And in his books, he had the records of all those American properties, not just the corporate properties, but the individual properties owned by their CEOs and all, right? So when Castro decides he's going to nationalize all American properties, a few weeks later, there's a couple of guys with machine guns in my father's office screaming, demanding his ledgers. My father refused out of loyalty to his friends. So he got detained. One thing led to another. He was taken to Guevara. He refused Che Guevara, the Argentinian guerrilla leader. He refused, and that's when Guevara took out a gun and said, I know that you have 2 little kids. Please don't make me use this. You need to get me those ledgers. So my father did. And that's when at least he spared his life. We're thankful for that. But then his words were, if I were you, I would leave the island. I cannot guarantee your future safety. And so we left. And so now I'm back, right? Now I'm back. But all that I saw upon arriving there were people hugging each other, loving each other, crying. Grandfather with a little girl. He brought her a big old teddy bear. She comes running, abuelito, which means little grandfather. And this friend meets a friend. And then a big kiss. And I'm realizing, wait a minute, Mario, calm down. This is no different than anywhere you've been. There's love. And then I began to investigate. And everywhere I went, wonderful things happened. But that moment where I learned that I had to leave Cuba changed my life. I thought that that would be the only moment in my life that I would ever be changed. I was wrong, because when I went back to that same house, something in me kept telling me, go up and sit in that balcony. I didn't know why. I didn't remember that moment. But I kept asking the owner, can I go sit in the balcony for a minute? And he kept saying, no, 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 no. My mother is up there. She's got a really bad headache. She's in an awful mood. You don't want to go up there. So, of course, I didn't want to go up there until finally he says, look, if you promise to sit at the edge of the stair landing, I'll let you go. And I did. That was the second moment. Because what happened the second time, as I remember everything that laid out in front of me, my father asking for permission to the entire family to leave Cuba, my grandfather coming to him and then saying, Ignacio, you cannot be a husband to my daughter or a father to my grandchildren if you're dead. Please go to the U.S. and come back when this nightmare is over. All that played back. And all of a sudden, I saw myself. The memory that came back was so intense that I could see myself looking like I was 56 years later, looking like I did at that moment. And then he looked at me. And I realized, look at me. Look at how young I was. And my first thought is, I need to tell him that everything is going to be okay. I remember the fear that I had when that moment happened. And then my next thought was, wait a minute, he isn't real. This is your memory that is so strong that you're actually seeing it. And then I realized I don't have to tell him anyways, because I have already lived that for both of us. What? And then he disappeared. And that second moment is the moment where we reunited, Terry. That's the moment that my Cuban life that was forgotten and my American life, which was everything I knew, at that moment, we reunited. He somehow stayed with his memories in a part of my subconscious that I could never access. At that point, the subconscious told my conscious, I'm going to release it. He's ready. He's here. And then it all came back. And then everything began to make sense. It was one of those beautiful moments that has occurred to other people, but is rare, but it happened to me.
What do you think you've learned about yourself as a result of this journey?
Well, the most important thing is when I left the U.S. to go to Cuba, I considered myself a Cuban American. When I came back a week later, I was no longer a Cuban American. I was then a Cuban and an American. Two beautiful lives, lived in two beautiful cultures, living in peace and harmony inside one life, our own.
What's the lesson for the rest of us from all of this?
Well, that there's more to us than we know, because we all have that vault. And there are things in there that you will never know, because it's not like you know what's in it. We all have that vault where there's things in there that we may never know. Many of us don't want to go there because we fear that those demons may still be there. In my case, the demons of 1960 were long gone in 2016. All that I felt was the love of my family. I could see their voices. I could feel them, their love towards me, my love towards them, my teacher, my school friends. It was beautiful regression. We all have that. And it's sometimes beautiful to understand as an adult, to think about what you felt as a child. And then you realize, yeah, I've always kind of sensed that as a sense, not as a thought. That's where it comes from.
Did the exercise of writing this memoir bring a sense of closure or peace for you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The more that I wrote, the more that I remembered. And the more that I expressed it in writing. And then I would reread it. Sometimes I would write something and I wouldn't know that I read it, that I wrote it until I read it. There are several passages in that book that when I read it back, I cried. The scene where my father takes me to the Cerro Stadium when I was sick to see the final Game 7 of the AAA championship baseball between the Sugar Kings and the Minneapolis Millers. And man, I was a big baseball fan. So was my dad. And I woke up sick that day. Sick or no sick, fever or no fever, my dad takes me. My mother was showering. Under the sound of the shower hitting the shower pan, we took off. But it was a great day and we won, right? And it was one of those memories that is bonding, you know, but it's beautiful because there I felt that relationship between my father and I. He was not going to go to that game alone. I wasn't that sick that I couldn't go, right? And so he understood bonding. He understood love. And I remembered that. And the craziest thing, I come back, so I want to make sure that what I am remembering is right. I go into the internet and I find that they had an old black and white video of the game. Somebody took a V8 movie, you know, those old movies, and then they made it into a video and they had it in the internet. And I'm watching the game and I'm remembering, and all of a sudden in the 8th inning with the game tied, the camera goes into the stands and begins filming the faces of all of the fans who were there. And it stopped in front of my father and me. That's the picture in the book. If you go to the book, you're going to see my dad and I at the game. I took that picture from the screen in my computer. How do you figure that?
That gives me chills, Mario.
Yeah. Had I not gone looking for it, I would have never found it. That's why you have to go looking for things because you never know. Sometimes there's something at work that's greater than you are, whatever it is. And in the book, I say, the devout would say that it was just, the wonder of the Almighty. The Indians would say that it was just good karma and, all that. Said, I don't care why it happened. I just let it happen to me. I call it the siren song.
Beautiful. What do you hope for Cuba's future?
What I hope for Cuba's future is Cuba's past, prior to Castro. What I hope is that Cuba becomes a democratic country, but that it also becomes independent and free with a capitalist economy where we can then deal with the rest of the world, and that the U.S. comes back to being our main trade partner, like it was. There's a place for the U.S., but not as another colonizing power. There's no room for another Spain colonizing. There's no room for another Castro dictatorship, and there certainly is no room for another colonizing power today. The Cubans deserve to finally live in peace, independent, sovereign, with a democratic society that deals in a capitalistic world.
If you could design a building for Cuba today, what would it be?
Oh, it would be as transparent as I possibly could, so that Cuba can reflect this natural beauty in a society that isn't fearful to build walls around them. I think Cuba's had walls around them much too long. It needs to be transparent. And at the same time, its political system is as transparent as the island and the people who live in it. All of us. Living in freedom, living with love, living in trust, trusting each other. How beautiful a representation of a great society would that be?
What do you hope people will take away from their encounter with your memoir?
Well, the fact that we all need to find our inner peace. If you go through life thinking you're missing something, if you go through life with a preconceived hate of something, you're not born with that hate. You develop it. So the question is why? If you go through life angry, you're not born angry. Why? We all have to learn a little about ourselves so that we can find our inner peace. Wouldn't it be nice if all of us could live in inner peace without these instincts that make our lives complicated and hurtful?
The book is a journey back into the vault in search of my faded Cuban childhood footprints. It's been written by our very special guest, Mario Cartaya. The website is mariocartaya.com. Mario, this has been a very powerful conversation for me. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for asking me and be able to get these pearls out there for the world.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.